Welcome to this first YouTube ever on the Lightman Reports. Let me introduce first to you Alex Lightman,
Hello.
author, futurist, fintech expert, global analyst, I would say. On the other hand, we have Eric Yu, who's the CEO of Metaverse DNA and is joining us to talk about his perspective on e-commerce and m-commerce. Alex, to just drop right the ball in the court, we heard your Lightman report of last week about actually the transition into e-commerce and m-commerce that's taking way faster a route than we ever perceived like 3 months ago even. So how do you see the roles of decentralized public blockchains in this whole development that you discussed last week?
Well, we've had during this, just to summarize and recap what that Lightman report was, it was the first one, and it's enabled by Metaverse DNA, which I very much appreciate. So in a summary, COVID-19 has caused a supply shock. All of a sudden, you can't get all the things you want. Still, after almost 2 months, you cannot get toilet paper in LA unless you have inside information about where it's going to be available. You still can't get gloves, masks, hand sanitizer. And so you basically have also a demand shock. Demand for, let's say, commercial food supplies from restaurants is down 100% in some places. You have about 50 to 80% of industries where demand has dropped 50 to 80%. And then you have market shock. So the stock market had its worst day of this millennium in March, when basically flights within Europe were canceled in a big day. It was 9.99% down in one day. And so two of the worst days of this millennium, of the last 20 years, both happened within the last 5 weeks or so. And now in the last 2 weeks, we've had the best 2-week performance of the Dow Jones since the 1930s.
Yes.
And so these are historic times. These are times that people will look back on 100 years and even 1,000 years from now and wonder what was happening with us. And so what I'm hoping that the Lightman Report will do is talk about what are the really big trends so we can get a perspective on how history will look at us, comparing us to the last 1,000 years and the next 1,000 years. Like, so what's the big thing? So the biggest trend of all for me is this once in 500-year shift in what people are buying in a major way. And the summary is that we had only 11% of all of our goods were being sold through e-commerce and m-commerce last year. That's not really very much. And so people were looking and extrapolating, okay, so how long will it take for us to have the majority of our goods sold online? And people were saying it would take as long as to 2040, 2050 or so. It actually is going to happen this year. And it's very rare that people can have mathematical precision, all these models looking at all these big companies that don't have an axe to grind and suddenly can be there. And it's almost as if the people who invest in Amazon and Netflix, Netflix was the best performing stock of the last decade. And it's almost as if they're psychic and they realize that people are going to be buying things from Amazon and at home streaming and binging on Netflix. And so to answer your question, which is a great question, Annemieke, basically public blockchains can play a big role in authentication of goods. You want to be able to know who the buyer is. You want to be able to know who the seller is. And this is a catastrophe in a big sense for buying masks and buying gloves and buying these things in global supply chains. Because as we've seen played out in the drama of the Donald Trump press conferences, the federal government is going in and not only outbidding states and companies and smaller countries, but it's even seizing goods along the way. So there's a big article in the New England Journal of Medicine about a Boston hospital and where the head of the hospital had to fly down and they put the medical supplies in food trucks because they didn't want to be stopped by federal agents who would get them. And it's almost like we've become a third world country over medical supplies because you do not have trusted sellers and you do not have trusted buyers. You have to still, in this age when we have all this disease, we still need that face-to-face. like that a hospital director, instead of saving lives, has to fly from Massachusetts to Georgia to go and sneak medical supplies, and they're stopped by federal agents who are talking about selling the, basically stealing them, grabbing them with no compensation and taking them somewhere we don't know. We need blockchains. We need to have trusted buyers, trusted sellers, and we basically want to speed up the transactions, and we want to have an increased transaction speed for e-commerce and m-commerce, because right now we have 8 billion people who want to buy, sell, borrow, loan, and swap with each other without meeting each other face to face. So you're not going to get this Lightman Report great transition of basically taking the time that would have taken to 2040 or 2050 in 1 year without blockchains, because you want to have the trust machine going.
Yes, exactly. Now, Eric, you're on the verge of launching a complete major new development with Metaverse dual network architecture. Now, if you just heard, you know, Alex's explanation on how this tremendous, I would say, it's not even an increase in speed, is a paradigm. I mean, we are witnessing something in history I've never seen in my lifetime. It's on one hand scary, it's worrying, but on the other hand, it's sort of an extreme experience in many ways. Now you're on the verge of actually launching something that enables this trustless way of doing things. So could you explain us a little bit more where you see this project develop in the area that Alex has just discussed, the e-commerce side of things? I don't hear you. You got your mic on. You're muted. You have to unmute.
Oh, yes.
I just love this is being live, guys. If
Yep.
ever I had proof this is not pre-recorded or this is not edited, we had it because Eric forgot to unmute his phone.
Well, that's my habit. Usually I join a video conference just to mute myself, just the background noise don't get into the
I know.
conference.
Like all of us, Eric's doing home office, Alex doing home office. So is, you know, everybody's doing home office. If you're decentralized, digitalized like we are already, I mean, let's say it's privileged in that respect. So Eric,
I have the best of both worlds, because I live on the 4th floor of a building and my office is on the 16th floor. So I have my home and my office, and I can go between them while still staying in quarantine.
Well, you know, we're a little bit more home-based, and I must say, I know that Eric decentralized and sent all his people home to give them safeguard over this very difficult period. We are blessed to be in an industry, basically, that enables us to do that. Many people are obliged to live hand to mouth, need to go out to work to even eat at the end of the day, and that's a devastating aspect that we're just facing worldwide. Eric, now you're on the brink of launching this major new development. How do you see this whole development of this fast transition, and you know, in comparison to your project?
Yeah, well, I think you're right that we're blessing that we're in the right industry right now. I mean, everything's online, everything's decentralized. So our team is very diverse. We have different offices around the globe. We have Shanghai office, which is in China. We have a Toronto office. We have a European partners as well. So for this pandemic, interestingly, on February, we have to order the Shanghai office to go home, right? Get quarantined and work from home. Work from home. Then in the late March, we are ordering the Toronto office, the Canadian office, you know, go home and work from home. So, but it doesn't impact us much because we're already used to the decentralized working environment, which is very good. So we're actually ahead of everybody else. And yeah.
So if you look to the e-commerce situation with the new Metaverse DNA technology, how do you see e-commerce? And I don't like to call it e-commerce or m-commerce. I just yesterday thought of a new term, which is called d-commerce. It's everything digital that got to do with commerce. Maybe I just invented it. Maybe somebody else already did. I just promote it to be d-commerce because it explains that it's everything that goes on digitally, whether it's on your phone, on the internet, your computer, whatever device comes next, it's digital. So I prefer digital commerce. So I think one of the things that I would like to talk about is how do you see this e-commerce transition, as an opportunity within the DNA development that you're just, ready to launch actually?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. Before I thought this coming maybe in 10, 20 years, but I think this COVID-19 situation just push everything forward much quicker. It will happen much quicker. So the DNA situation, I think Alex said is really good. A lot of people say blockchain. Blockchain is like trace where this goods come from, right? So we're sure, we're 100% confident the origin of the producer, where it come from, what kind of material, raw material you're using. But for using DNA, we have a little bit more than this, because what's important for DNA is digital identity. We have digital identity for everybody, buyers and sellers. So not only goods. So goods, well, other blockchains can take care of that too. But for the touch of DNA, when we have digital identity, all the sellers are verified. And also the buyers, well, now you don't have a situation that some hospital people have to steal goods from somewhere else, right? So this is yeah.
I just heard worse stories where complete planes were hijacked in Shanghai by governments, which is one way. No, it's a true story. It was in the papers and actually in China as well. Yeah.
Right. And also add on to your digital commerce idea. I think yes, I think you got it right. I'll give a little bit story about my mom. My mom in her 70s, right? So in a million years, I never dreamed that she could, use digital commerce. But early this year, she started using, what do you call this, e-commerce, well, shopping online, right? Now she's at home. Now she started using her iPad and shop. This is like, everything happens like so quickly, like it caught me off guard, right? It's an interesting story, yeah.
I think if you, listen to this whole idea, Alex, where do you think the advantages for something like e-commerce are in a platform like DNA? What does it have to offer more than what we already know? We talked a little bit about the digital identity part, like seller, buyer, trustless society. What more as an advantage do you see grow for a platform like Metaverse DNA is now developing?
Sure. Well, I think that your point about digital commerce is important. I've heard that the big tech companies like Google and Facebook are called big digital. So d-commerce, and it goes well with that big digital theme. That's how I refer to it.
That we invented it here today, okay?
Well, it's very generous of you to say we, so sure. As far as I understand it, Metaverse's dual network architecture clears an important dilemma. It solves a dilemma between, on the one side, security, and on the other side, speed. We need both of them. And one of the big things that I have always liked, I've done travel and speaking with the CTO of Metaverse DNA, Ken Wang. Ken Wang worked in charge of blockchain at Huawei for 2 years. And though I didn't understand every word he said because the talks were in Chinese, he had the slides enough in English and I could read them. And he eats, sleeps, breathes digital identity. And ultimately, that's one of the big drawbacks from the first 10 years of the commercial use, of the end user use of blockchains, is because it's basically like Swiss bank accounts. Everybody is anonymous. And so the idea of getting digital ID right so that the people you want to know who you are know, but the people who you don't want to know don't know, is very important. And doing that fast and doing that securely, that makes a big difference. And so basically, and a key place is COVID-19. We now have, in the world, we have, well, I can't speak for the whole world, but I can speak for the United States. We have about 4 million people now tested, and we have about 350 million people in the country right now. And so just over 1% of people have been tested. And many people don't really want their testing status to be known. And people are doing all this kind of tests. So we have HIPAA requirements. you can be fined $2,500 per security breach of a medical record per day. So if you're a hospital and you're having to tell the CDC, so the way that it works in the US, again, I don't know the whole world, but there are 36 databases with your medical records, and half of them have your name and address, and half of them just are supposed to anonymize it. They just have your medical data. So you're not supposed to be able to click and say, oh, there's this many people who are infected. And in the United States, it's over 750,000 people right now. And we have now passed 42,000 people who are dead from this. Unfortunately, I'm very sad about that. And you don't want people to just be able to keep clicking on these numbers and then find out who lives and who has it, because you're going to have neighborhoods that if they think somebody's infected, they will hound them out. We had the stories from the very first month of January of small villages in China blocking off their roads with cinder blocks and mortar to keep people from coming into their village. And, that protects them. But basically we have to get digital identity right, because we're going to do so much online. And so, the metaverse dual network architecture, I think, could be a very important aspect of that.
I would say that, with all the hacks that we've seen over the past period, and, if I can speak for Europe, the apps as a sort of a copycat of what's going on in Southeast Asia, like Korea and Japan with, registration, we have a different culture setting. So we are less prone to accept from a government that it takes all our information. It's GDPR law, that's EU. So there's a lot to do about exactly that aspect. Do I need to be personally as a real world identity to be identified, or is it enough that somewhere I've proven to be a real person and then I've a digital avatar, or whatever you want to call it, a digital identity, and that way at least my privacy is protected. So it's a huge discussion in Europe actually this week, even in my own country, where 9 apps have been developed and all flunked over the weekend. It was to be expected.
What do you mean? What kind of apps?
Apps that would register who has coronavirus and who has not.
Got it. Tracing.
There's an app that you can do tracking and tracing. It's not in our culture in Europe. So, we're less prone to take on board the same, how do you say, I wouldn't say control, but the basics of fighting this virus. So if digital identity was already here, and I actually had that discussion today, if sovereign identity in some way had created a digital avatar, of which we had a big summit even in The Hague in February, we would have been out of the woodworks already. I even had a discussion this afternoon about exactly the same subject. And because we haven't got that on the blockchain, we're stuck in the old economy way of, pinpointing the personal identity like a passport copy and saying she and him and everybody else has got corona, and that way creates social, I would say almost discrimination, because that's the way it's heading. Instead of creating immunity groups which are anonymous, which would be great if we knew that we were safe in an environment where everybody was tested or everybody was immune, we're still stuck in the discussion of the old database structures where we don't have blockchain. So Eric, if we look at the seriousness and you hear all this idea, how do you see this development going in the next few months? Because we saw a tremendous speed in the transition to digital commerce. Do you think that this same speed will apply as to finally adopting all these new technologies that, both all of us have been involved for the last 4 or 5 or longer years in this new blockchain era, all these new developments? Do you think the same transition will go that direction? Or will we still be fighting, the old castles of sticking to what we call, the old ways, which obviously has proven us wrong over the last couple of weeks? It doesn't work. That's as clear as hell.
We're being pushed out, right? We're being pushed out of our old way. There's no way we can do old way anymore.
I think so too.
Yeah, the other day I went to this supermarket. It was like a long lineup. They reduced the flow of the crowd, right? So there are only 50 people can get into Walmart at a certain time. So there will be a long lineup. I was there for 1 hour. it just doesn't work for me. So I decided not to do that anymore. So I have to come back, and I do it online, right? And shop online. So we're being pushed into that fast growing. Interestingly, I think what you said called sovereign identity is very, very important, because when we use technology, we need to really think about what's the right way of using the technology. So if we have an identity that say, oh, I had COVID-19 before, but I recovered, I'll say I'm like actively carrying the virus. Isn't that open for abuse or say discrimination, right?
Yeah.
So it's a huge subject. So something needs to be done, but it's not non-invasive. So if you trust our identity to a centralized organization, like maybe you trust to Netflix, which is the fast-growing stock price for the decade, right? And I noticed Amazon just created a 52-week high today, right? Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of our information.
Yeah, that's because of the Lightman Report saying how valuable it is.
There you go. I mean, yeah, but how they make money, right? So whenever you log on to, let's say, Amazon, you bought something, that all of a sudden your Google just promoting similar item to you. They're actually making money off the data you provide to them. So it is my data, right? I search for something. Let's say I want to purchase a phone. I'll say I want to buy something else. I want to buy a hard drive, right? Something like that. Then on the next day, they use the information you feed to the internet and sell something back to you. And they got money from the company that bought their commercial, right? But what I'm trying to say is we need to have the sovereign identity, which is this identity actually owned by you. And this identity will own all the data that you provide to the system, right? Say all the data that owned by you, including the medical records. Now, the next topic is if anyone wants to make money off the data, by owning the data under your digital identity, you can make sure that you get paid for use of your own data. Of course, under your permission, right? So this is what I see the direction we're going. And yeah, Metaverse DNA is actually designed to go that way.
Yes. Do you agree with that direction, Alex? That should be taken, that anything you do belongs to you, and that, you should be able to, instead of big companies, at least get a part of the pie?
Sure. I had worked in the early days with Data, Digital Asset Trade Association, and one of the co-founders of Data is Brittany Kaiser, who wrote the book Targeted and worked at Cambridge Analytica. And she has the Own Your Data Foundation now. And one of the people working on that. So yes, I've been exposed to those arguments for almost as long as I've been in blockchain, and the numbers are pretty amazing. I mean, when you consider that Google makes 120 billion taking people's data. Like as we're going through, how if you have certain kinds of glasses on night vision, you can see into different spectra. So you can see, for instance, into the infrared. If somebody's in a room, you can see them through the wall because they're emitting infrared. You can go and see. And if you had glasses on that looked at your data, you leave kind of a smog around you. You have medical data, you have purchasing data, you have movement data, and people are being tracked. And Facebook is tracking people even off the app and making they're making companies worth $1 trillion. I've given talks before, and I can do a Lightman report on this about how data is the new oil. And that's not even a metaphor anymore. If you look at the revenue from data now in the United States, it's more than the revenue for oil. And as we're having this today, we've had a historic low. So in the United States, oil has dropped to $11 a barrel. There's nobody who was predicting that. Remember a few years ago, Goldman Sachs was predicting $300 a barrel. And you have Canadian...
Yeah, it was responsible for actually the shallow oil projects in the United States to become more dependent on their own oil, and these projects are all going to go belly up because the prices are ridiculously low at the moment.
Well, the most interesting price in Eric's country of Canada, Western Canadian crude today, fell to a negative price. In other words, they have so much of it, they pay you to take it away.
You know, just walking into this conversation. So 5 minutes ago, I looked. The price was $4.90.
Who could imagine this?
Not
Yeah.
Nobody
could imagine this January 1st. And that's actually, I want to get back to the theme of your Lightman report, that incredible transition that we're going through to digital commerce or d-commerce. I like the word d-commerce. It's simple. Everything goes under there, d-commerce.
Okay.
That immense speedy transition. I think if we summarize
it's
what we...
D for Dirkes commerce.
I'm not that presumptuous. I'm not doing that, Alex. I think it's really nice. I haven't thought about that. I just thought, you know, it's all digital. So we're going to have new devices. We're going to have, you know, virtual machines. We're going to have all sorts of stuff that will enable us to step in a shopping mall with furniture in it and discuss what we want to buy without even going there anymore. That's all digital commerce. It's way, way ahead of what we now know as just web shops and, you know, doing something on a mobile phone. I think the future development will still enable us to do much, much more in digital commerce than we ever thought. It will enable us to go in a plant in China or the Philippines or the United States, walk around the production process, you know, pick the colors, do the design. That world is still, you know, in its baby shoes, in my view. So I think d-commerce is sort of a better phrase because it lifts us out of, you know, what we have known so far. And it's so incredibly fast. If Corona stays with us and other COVID-19, like COVID-2, COVID-4 will influence our world, we might have to face up to the fact that it's not going anywhere. One of the, I think out of this transition that I want to take away from this interview is that when I hear you both, blockchain is going to be exceptionally influential in this whole development because it's the only way that we can provide ourselves with digital identity, with speed and security in a trustless society between buyers and sellers. And I would say the provenance, the honesty, the genuinity of products in a general. I would think that we can all agree that that's sort of what we take away from this discussion. We are going to do much more of these shows as we're going to digitalize actually the Lightman Report for the rest of the year. So for everybody who's been viewing,
I taped the next 3 episodes yesterday.
That's going to be wonderful.
But you told me 10 to 15 minutes, and they're about 20 minutes. So maybe we have to chop them up.
Both great talkers. For the future, we will try always to stay on the subject of the Lightman Report because the 3 of us can talk hours and hours about blockchain development, the world economy, and all these developments. We're all on top of it. I want to thank you both so much, Alex, for your general analysis, your global view, and your fintech expertise. Eric, so much for your, you know, your explanation about the future of an actual product, an actual project that's going to be available. I think with the both of you on the balance, Alex from, I would say, an objective perspective from a world vision, who's not doing anything, you know, in presenting a platform, and Eric, you from the practical reality of the world of really making product available to the world. So I want to thank you both.
Thank you, Annemieke.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Everybody, thank you for watching and see you next.
Thank you, Eric, for sponsoring the Lightman Report. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.